What happens when one man tries to watch all the horror films of the 1980s? Well, we're about to find out because I'm your host, Josh Spiegel, and this is the 80s Project. Welcome back to the 80s Project, and we are just really rocking into 1984 right now. And this year is chock full of really cool movies that everyone has heard of, and also a bunch of really small things that no one knows exists. And this episode has quite a few of those. Let's dive in now and check out some of these a little bit more obscure but very fun entries. Let's get more conventional with the horror vibes now for one that was on the small screen and debuted on May 24th, and it's Invitation to Hell. It begins at a country club, and we have an easily distracted limo driver that runs over the queen of daytime TV. But she's okay, and she straight up torches the guy. There's then a family that's moving, and it's Spencer for Hire, Eddie Valiant's girl, Punky Brewster, and Bastian, and this is just an all-star family. They move into their house, which is just a short distance away from the Poltergeist house location, and the Can Man is here, before being blobbed. Matt has some sort of new invention that's the talk of his company, and he's been moved in order to work on it. And on a tour of the new company, sees a design for a spacesuit with a flamethrower. Little Robbie has trouble making friends since bullies destroy his video game, and Matt meets the head of the country club, and it's Jessica Jones, not as marvelous here. Polly is the local sheriff, and there's been a real lack of Nicholas Worth on this project because we haven't seen him since Swamp Thing in '82. Meanwhile, Jessica is leading families into some sort of magic mist, and a woman named Grace is trying to get to confidential files, and RJ Fletcher shows up as Matt's boss. Things ramp up when people start acting weird, and everyone really wants Matt and his family to join up that country club, and Patricia and the kids go in, and their personalities sharply change. Soon, Matt realizes that he's all alone and has to figure out what's going on at that club and how to stop it. And this is the third entry for horror master Wes Craven on the project. We covered him in '81 with Deadly Blessing and in '82 with Swamp Thing, and we're going to see a whole hell of a lot more of him this year. This one was done for ABC and began life in a weird way. As a part of Susan Lucci's contract with ABC, she was guaranteed a strong role in a nighttime movie of the week as a move to get her nominated for a regular Emmy as opposed to a daytime one. This was the project that they developed in order to appease that contract clause. They brought on Craven to direct, but by the time that he had joined, most of the pre-production was complete, so it was simply a matter of just going to set to direct the scenes. Even though most of the casting was complete, Wes was still able to get gigs for some of his favorite recurring actors in smaller roles like Worth, Virginia Vincent, and a cameo from Michael Berryman. There's not really rating information about it or anything, but it did get some attention and was nominated for a Primetime Emmy, but not for Lucci, for art direction, although it didn't win. And this is a 3. It's not great, but it is silly fun and doesn't make much sense, in the best way possible. I mean, the ending has him going into hell in a spacesuit, so I had to give it points for that. The HCS is a 2.5 because it's a Wes Craven film, and for that alone, it earns points. But it's not one of his filmography that anyone talks about and didn't do much for his career in the long run, considering it was a quick work for hire. Should you watch it? Yes, consider this your invitation.
Tell me where my daughter is.
But I am your daughter.
This next one had a debut on May 25th in New York City and a very limited theatrical release, but then mostly went straight to video with Fleshburn. It begins with a scroll that tells us that Calvin Dugai left 5 people to die in the desert back in 1975 after an argument, and he was evaluated to say that he couldn't distinguish right from wrong, so he was institutionalized. While in there, he has flashbacks to being in the military, and one night just up and escapes. And it's actually really easy. He just sort of leaves. He randomly kills a man who picks him up, and when we get a good look at Duguay, it's Billy, but I guess he's the predator now. Right afterwards, he shows up at the house of the lawyer that was responsible for getting him put away, holding him at gunpoint, and then also the sheriff that took him in, and then a couple of psychiatrists who declared him insane. He ties them up, puts them in the back of a Jeep, and drives them out to the middle of nowhere, and leaves them there. They rally to try to figure out how to survive the brutal sun that's bound to hit them the following day, and face broken legs, snakes, and the elements. They don't really do much of anything due to the guy's leg, and mainly just argue amongst each other, and that's what happens for like an hour. Finally, Duguay shows up and starts shooting at them, but it seems like they have more to fear from each other. And this one is from George Gage, and it was the second film that he directed after a 1978 sports film called Skateboard. It'll be the last thing he directs until 1996, when he made the switch to doing documentary shorts and features, which he still does to this day, along with his wife Beth, who co-wrote this film. The budget was $3 million, and it seems to have been financed by a pair of professional tennis players who occasionally dipped into film production. It seems as if at one point Robert Ginty was slated to be involved, but for whatever reason, that didn't happen. The poster points out that it's from the author of Death Wish, as it was adapted from Brian Garfield's 1978 novel Fear and a Handful of Dust, which was also this film's working title. It was not a hit though, although it did get decent play on HBO and cable services. And it's okay, it's a 2.5. There's never really seems to be much at stake here, and except for the moments with the guy shooting at them, they don't really seem to be in all that much trouble. I feel it either needed to go trashier or more serious, and not the middle of the road tack that it went with. The HCS is just a 1 though, since it's not talked about, not known, and didn't leave any impact on the genre. Should you watch it? I'd say skip, but it's certainly not a bad time. We're going to talk about a few now that don't have any set release dates, and these next couple are just known to have come out sometime in '84. And the first is Death Wish Club. So there's this dude who calls himself the Great Lover, and he goes to a local carnival dressed in a suit to hit on women half his age. And when I say hit on, I mean just offer them up a bunch of money like a hooker. So yeah, great lover, huh? He even creepily calls her little girl, but she's weird herself.
I hate Chopin. I'm glad Chopin's dead.
He died in 1849, lady. More than 100 years before this movie is made. Why do you have such a strong opinion on this? So she wants to be in the movies, so he puts her in adult films. And Glenn sees her and falls in love with her. So follow me here. He sees a random girl in a porno reel. Takes that reel to the store he rented it from and is like, who's this girl? And the guy gives him the address of the company who made the film. So Glenn actually goes there and asks the director where to find the porn star in the film he just watched. And the director tells him where to find her. And yeah, that's perfectly normal behavior. Let's give the obsessive stalker detailed directions on where to find the girl he claims to love from watching her in one smut film. Sure. She plays piano at George's club, and he wants to follow her home.
Well, they don't go anywhere. They live downstairs.
Yeah, just give the pretty girl's exact whereabouts to a random stranger. Great idea. And someone downstairs does it too. Like, every person is super willing to let some random stalker find his prey. They meet.
Hey, why is it that you try so hard to hide the nice person inside of you?
Dude, you don't know her. You saw her bone a guy one time. Seek help. She gets enamored with him, so she sends for him to be brought back to her, and they start up a fling with Charles's approval. But then things take a turn when they invite him to a special dinner, a meeting of a unique club that put themselves in life-threatening situations, like letting loose a bug with a highly toxic sting. But then Greta is seemingly killed. Although then she reappears in the guise of Charlie, now believing herself to be a man, although Glenn thinks that it's all a twisted game. Glenn wants to snap her out of it and goes to see a doctor, and he suggests, and I'm not making this up, to rape her to revert her back to her senses. Yeah. But then they also finally come back to the Death Wish Club stuff. Finally. So this weirdness of Creep is from John Carr, and it was his first film in almost a decade since he did Fugitive Lovers in 1975. It was based on a book called Greta, and it was first released under the title The Dark Side to Love. But then, later, it was put on home video as Death Wish Club, but was also released later on as Carnival of Fools. But then, there's the wilder part. This film will be chopped down to around 20 minutes long and included in the anthology film Night Train to Terror, which we'll discuss in the 85 project and talk about what happened there. And look, this is a 3.5. This is a weird, creepy, just mind-boggling movie that doesn't make a lick of sense, but you'll literally be completely curved by every single choice that it makes, as it doesn't follow any sort of narrative logic, but it's really wild and fun. The HCS is just a 1 though, because no one knows what this is, and there's really no one involved with any industry cred. Should you watch this? Yes, and question your sanity right after you do. Let's move right along to another one that has no set release date and was released in some way in '84, and it's Shadows Run Black. It opens with a woman being chased by a guy with a knife in the woods, but they're actually a couple just playing around, and later he goes to work on his car and is killed, with his girlfriend being next. They're part of a string of murders, and the police are on the case, dubbing him the Black Angel, and they bring in a woman to discuss their top suspect, a guy named Jimmy. Then there's a college party which has this magician and a guy playing stand-up bass while wearing a tuxedo, like every college party you've been to. We then meet Jimmy, and holy cow, it's the postman. And then another victim is claimed while in the swimming pool. Turns out that the head officer on the case had a daughter who was kidnapped and then found dead, with the killer never being caught. Julie keeps on having someone call her on the phone, being creepy, and an overprotective racist brother, and that killer keeps on killing, crossing names off of a list as he does. They throw you a bunch of red herrings along the way, although it's mostly pretty clear who the killer is here. And this one was done independently, but then was distributed by Troma and was directed by Howard Hurd. To this day, it's the only film that he directed, although he's done a large number of gigs in the editing department, including Risky Business and a number of TV shows. The producer on the film was a guy named Eric Luzel, and he made a number of low-budget films back in the day, and one day, a stagehand working on sets strolled into his office and said that he wanted to be an actor and wanted to be considered for a role in the projects. That guy was Kevin Costner, and they were making a film called Malibu Hot Summer, so they just popped him in there. Even though they thought that he was a bad actor, they thought he was handsome on screen, so they gave him the role of Jimmy here as well. And of course, he then took off. This film was actually shot all the way back in '81, and only just given some sort of screening in '84 to drum up interest for distributors, but no one bit. Later, when Costner's star started to rise, they were able to sell the rights to Troma, and it was finally given a video release in 1986. Meanwhile, though, around that same time, Costner called Loisel to buy the rights to both films to keep them from being released, and was not happy to find out that they had already been sold off. It didn't really get much attention, though, outside of people noting the actor was in it, and Malibu Hot Summer seems to have gotten more notice than this. And it's a 2. It's pretty run-of-the-mill. Like, honestly, without the amount of nudity, which there's a whole lot, it feels like a made-for-TV movie, and it's extremely predictable. The HCS is a 1.5 since it's just another slasher flick, and were it not for the inclusion of Costner, would be completely forgotten. Should you watch it, you can probably pass. Here's another one with an unknown date, but it came out in Australia at some point in '84 and did get a US run, but not until '91, and it's Innocent Prey. This one has a young Aussie woman named Gwen coming to visit her friend Kathy in Dallas, and Kathy is wondering if you like what you see. Kathy is married and her husband heads off to work while the girls catch up, and he has a record of marrying women and then them dying and him cashing in on the insurance. He gets caught in some new shady dealings and forced out of business, so he goes out to a bar and picks up a hooker. And if she looks familiar, well, it's because that's the infamous Debbie Sue Voorhees in her first film role, about 1 year before she'd cause us all to fall in love with her in A New Beginning. Joe gets a bit carried away and murders his companion, but the act is witnessed by Kathy. She tells the police, who come and arrest him, and he's deemed insane and institutionalized. He manages to escape, though, and again, it's really easy. Just like in Fleshburn, he just sort of climbs over one fence. The police warn Kathy, but I guess their call comes a little late because the dude's right there, and she manages to get away, and in order to stay safe, decides to hide out in Australia. She moves into Gwen's building, and the guy that she leases from is a bit of an odd duck, and that's because he has a surveillance system set up and watches the people in his apartments. He takes an odd liking to Kathy, but then Joe also figures out where she went and follows her there, keeping in touch with the US through Detective Arrogant. But will her husband get to her before Philip does, or will he end up helping out? And this was an Australian film, shot under the title of Voyeur, but getting a name change along the way. The director here is Colin Eggleston, and his career is interesting. He did the really cool 1978 flick Long Weekend about the killer animals, and later would do Sky Pirates, a fun Indiana Jones clone. It was shot in '83 and then basically vanished, although it definitely had some screenings in '84 since some Australian newspapers ran reviews of it. But then it didn't get distribution until years later. It got a VHS release in the UK in '89 and didn't hit US shelves until '91 and mainly slipped into the background. And this is a 3. I like parts of it a whole lot. The opening stuff with Joe is great and the setup is fantastic. But as soon as Kathy gets to Australia, it loses its way a whole lot and feels stagnant for the entire second act. But then the ending is cool and makes up for it. The significance is just a 1 though, because it's never spoken of and barely got a release, and if it weren't for Souls, there wouldn't be much in the way of recognizable faces. Should you watch it? I think so. It's not great, but it has fun moments and nice surprises. Okay, we move away from our entries with completely unknown dates, and let's look at one with a partially unknown date since it came out here at some point in June of '84, but it looks like it did have a date of March 15th in the UK, but it's Blind Date, the one without Bruce Willis. This kicks things off with a woman being chloroformed and then straps her to an operating table and starts to scalpel. Joseph Bottoms is here, and we last saw him on the sci-fi project in Wishman, but also here in the horror project with The Sins of Dorian Gray and The Intruder Within. Here he plays a guy who loves his dentist and works for a fashion magazine. He works with the mother of a baby that sounds like John McClane, and they're involved, but he keeps crossing paths with this model that reminds him of a former love. And when I say crossing paths, I mean that he spies on her with binoculars. And she's the barbarian queen herself, Lana Clarkson. Jonathan is rich, and I guess to show that, he plays Atari on like 6 different TV screens. And I guess this is supposed to be a sign of success, but it just looks like it'd be distracting. Deanna Troi is here, though not for long, as she's another victim of that killer from the intro. Well, Jonathan believes that model is his ex, since she was attacked by a bunch of thugs and hid away afterwards, and he never saw her again. And while spying on her, he gets into an accident and is rendered blind. They say that they're not sure why he's blind, as he should be able to see, and he tries to adjust to his new situation. His doctor is, "What are you doing, Dave?" And they suggest trying out a new experimental technology where they hook him up to electrodes and it works like a sort of a sonar. And it works, but he has to walk around with these headphones on all the time. He uses his newfound partial vision to go right back to spying on Rachel, eventually even breaking into her place to watch her sleep. And man, this block is filled with lead characters who cross over into creep territory. But then, Jonathan and that killer cross paths, and he sees him, or well, as much as he can see anyone, and he has to try to help to bring his murderous spree to a halt. This one was from director Nico Mastorakis, and he's been in the game for a while by this point, working in film since the late 60s. He had previously gone into the horror world in 1976's Island of Death, and we'll see him again with The Zero Boys. This one saw him doing a very giallo-inspired flick mixed with a dash of US slasher, but it didn't get much of a wider release, although it did get a decent amount of cable play, and oddly, the credits promise a sequel called Run, Stumble, Fall, although that never came to be. And this is interesting. I'm giving this a 3 as well. It's perhaps too long and doesn't get to the point fast enough, but it's well done and has good character stuff going on. The HCS is just a 2 since it's another one that didn't get a lot of press or attention, but it had some cable love and enough known stars to get it an extra point. Should you watch it? Sure. Make a date with it tonight. We'll end this block with our highest profile entry here, and it debuted in Italy at some point in June at a festival called Mistfest, and would go wider the following year in August of '85, and it's The Hills Have Eyes Part 2. It gives us a quick text recap of the first film, and then we see Bobby, again played by Robert Houston, dealing with those events. It basically shows us the entire ending of Part 1, and he wants to go to these races to show off a new form of gas that he's created, but he's really nervous. Bobby's racing team included a guy who would fight Jason someday, and his blind girlfriend, Cass, and some other wacky fellas, including the mayor of Delta City, and Cisco's wife. But after more flashbacks, Bobby decides that he just can't bring himself to go to the desert out of fear. But the team's co-owner will, and she's Rachel, but she used to go by Ruby, played by an also returning Janice Blythe. She makes sure to bring another returning character, Beast, and along the way they tell the story of the Twisted Mutant family and talk about Ruby, not realizing she's with them. But what's she doing? Well, she's asleep and having lengthy flashbacks, of course. But then, because they screwed up and forgot about daylight savings times, they decide to take a shortcut through a more remote pass, and their bus breaks down. They make their way to an old mining ranch, and Beast starts going nuts, and they soon discover that Pluto is there, somehow still alive after meeting his demise, and again, played by the great Michael Berryman. But then it happens, the thing that this movie is the most known for. When he sees Pluto, Beast, the dog, has a flashback. Yes, the dog. But then it's very apparent that Pluto's not alone, and there's more than one mutated family member out there, and our group has to survive. And Jesus, I don't even know where to begin with this one. Like, first of all, I don't even know where to place this, and having it in June of '84 seems wrong, especially when I can't find any information about the festival it was said to have run in. But I guess there was a few listed for '84, so I guess it did. But look, here's the story. This is also from Wes Craven, and he did this film out of necessity. After Deadly Blessing and Swamp Thing didn't do that well, he was having some trouble finding work, and the only movie he can get off the ground was this one, and he was only given a budget of $700K to work with in 1983. But then, when they were about 2/3 of the way complete, they ran out of money, and the studio didn't want to give them more, so the project was abandoned. If you go by the reports of those festivals, it seems like a rough cut was thrown together for screenings, but it's also possible those screenings have the wrong dates, and this actually might belong in 1985, because, as we'll see in a couple of episodes, later in '84, Craven would have a massive hit with A Nightmare on Elm Street, and the director would suddenly be in high demand. So they either begged him or held him to some sort of contract, but they got him to complete the film, and he did so by splicing in a whole bunch of flashbacks to pad the runtime and get it to feature length, hence the dogback. It was unanimously torn to shreds, and even Craven disowned it, but it barely even got a release, playing on only a handful of theaters and then being rushed to the home market right after. One interesting note about the unfinished nature of the film is the fate of Ruby. She's a main character, and in an original script was meant to fall into a pit of spikes, but instead she's just knocked down and hits her head on a rock. It's insinuated that this kills her, but it's also possible that she survived, I suppose. Of course, much later there was a remake of the original film that had a sequel of its own, but it's not a remake of this particular film and follows a different plot. I should also point out that this film has a score by Harry Manfredini, and even his heart isn't in it because it's basically just his Friday score again.
Raven don't get fooled like Papa Joop! Oh no!
And it's a 2. There's some fun things here and there, like for instance, dog flashback, but it's mostly just sloppy and dull. The HCS is a 2.5 since it's by one of horror's biggest legends, a sequel to one of his bigger films, and got a lot of shelf time in video stores, but never reached any higher in terms of recognition. Should you watch it? Normally I'd say no, but the dog scene does have to be seen to be believed.
The Reaper sucks!
So there you have it. A kind of a weirdo block. A lot more obscure entries in this particular one. And I gotta say, I think my favorite of this one is probably Death Wish Club. It's such a strange, weird movie that I kept scratching my head in. And it was just so much fun watching everything get revealed. But let me know which of these is your favorite. Tell me that in the comments down below. Which of these have you seen? Which of these would you now like to see? Which of these have you never heard of before? Put that in the comments down below. Also, if you like this video, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel if you enjoy it, and hit the bell to get notified when new videos come up. And also check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/movietimelines and help support this channel. And yeah, we're just chugging right along. This is episode 4. I think there's about 11 in 1984. So we've still got quite a bit of ways to go with this year right here on the 80s Project.